gents. I hope you're all well and nesting safely, and looking forward to today's webinar with Diane and Emily and myself. Let's get started. So first things first, let's get a couple of introductions going. Diane, over to you.
Thank you, David. So good afternoon. My name is Diane Brocklebank. I'm a director at PIF, which is the not-for-profit industry body representing regulated providers of e-money and payment services. And we have been advocating for the industry for nearly 15 years.
Hey, Emily, over to you.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Emily Baum, and I am a consultant that specialises in the prepaid and debit space. I've been in the market for about 13 years, working on a variety of different programmes, from travel card products to government disbursement solutions.
And I'm David Pope. I'm a bit of a fraud prevention, customer onboarding, anti-money laundering geek. And I also happen to be the marketing director at HooYu. So with today's experts and myself, let's have a look at the agenda. So we've done our intros. In a minute, we'll have a little chat about why we thought it was important to release a report about customer onboarding success rates and why we're having this webinar today. And then we'll get stuck into some stats from the research that Diane and I did, and we'll get Emily to comment on what we're seeing in all that lovely research. We'll look at what percentage of onboarding processes actually get over the finishing KYC line in the fintech and e-money worlds. We'll look at how long it takes those KYC processes to be undertaken. We'll examine where customers drop out in the onboarding process, and then look at how firms expect to improve levels of new customer acquisition. And if there's time, we'll have a look at some best practice, perhaps a little demo of what it looks like in that process, and we'll finish on some Q&A. So on that note, if you do have questions, please do fling them at us. Within your GoToWebinar control panel or tools, you'll be able to throw questions, and we'll take those questions at the end. So without further ado, why did we decide to focus on customer onboarding? So Diane, if you'd like to lead off on that for us.
Yeah, I will. Thank you, David. So yes, why the focus on customer onboarding? So if we think about our mission at PIF, which is as a representative body for the sector, our role is to build the best possible understanding of the industry. So that's the e-money and fintech businesses that operate in the sector, and the different types of business models with regulators, with government, and also with policy influencers. And so key to that policy objective really is to evidence how firms in our industry approach their commitment to KYC obligations. And we've conducted extensive research over the years to capture and document the processes and technologies our members use to onboard their customers, particularly new customers. And this really helps us to speak up for an industry that's working really hard to prevent their products from being used for unlawful purposes.
Brilliant, thanks Diane. And Emily, from your perspective, why do you think this is a useful topic for us to examine?
So I see a lot of customers that imagine seeing their product up on the side of a bus going around central London, and they're very much focused on getting the brand out there, getting people to see the brand, having a significant presence on social media. But a lot of the times they forget about some of the basics, and this to me is one of the basics, which is making sure that the onboarding process is quick, it's slick, it's intuitive, and it's not inconvenient. And this is particularly important as consumers, well, everybody in general, start to have a shorter attention span. We need to make sure that the customer onboarding journey is nice and tight and reduce that level of drop-off, because drop-off means no revenue.
Thanks, Emily. And so, from my perspective, my sort of like journey in KYC over the years, like V.1, 1.0 was really all about database checking. And then I used to work with a company that did document validation, and that was kind of like V2.0. And then as HooYu's grown over the years, what we've all come to understand is that there's actually two sides to the coin here. Number one is the KYC to make sure that as an industry we're adhering to anti-money laundering compliance processes. But the other side of the coin is to help firms with the onboarding to maximise the success of the onboarding rates. And what we've come to realise is it's very important to work with a company, a KYC provider that gives you not just the KYC tools under the hood, but also that lovely front end to guide the customer through the onboarding process. So that's why we all sort of like came together and coalesced around the subject. And we recently conducted some research, and we'll share those stats with you in a minute. So Diane, if you would give us a bit of a summary of the research we did, the methodology, that sort of thing.
Sure. So the background really to this latest round of research was really just to go one step further and lift the lid on the industry's approach to customer onboarding and KYC. And the findings we'll be sharing you today is based on anonymous real-world data, which we gathered from a representative sample of the industry with firms varying both in size and also in business model.
Okay, so without further ado, let's see what we found out.
Yes, so what we can see on this slide is that overall, these numbers suggest some generally well thought out onboarding processes. But we can also see, and what our research very clearly reveals, is some quite inefficient onboarding processes, where some firms are losing more than 50% of their applications.
I think this slide's also really interesting because the number 74% makes everyone think we don't have a problem. But actually, when you monetize it, that's a quarter of customers that are falling by the wayside along the journey that will never potentially engage with your product ever again. And that's quite a serious problem.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think when you look at it as like an exam grade percentage, yeah, if I got 74% in my French exams at school, I would have been chuffed. But when you look at it from the perspective of the fact you're throwing 26% of your potential customers away, it becomes a different story. I think also, in my mind, I think this percentage, to be fair, has probably got slightly better over the last 5 years. I remember we did actually conduct a similar exercise with retail banks back in 2017, and the retail banks they will lose, their success rate was 52%, meaning that they lost 48%. Conversely, we've just produced this same study with a lot of online gambling operators, and their funnel performs better than emoney and fintech operators. They're actually dropping only 13% of their applications, but that's a very different industry. So what I find quite shocking about this, yes, sure. So the average, is still leaving money on the table. But what I find really shocking is the number of firms that do have a less than 50 or a 50 to 60% success rate in terms of customer onboarding.
And I think you've hit the nail on the head as well when you talk about banks with legacy systems versus newer companies like gambling companies that might have slightly more intuitive ways of getting people across the line. Perhaps it's old versus young.
Yeah,
could be.
And I think this is actually, in some ways, it is actually a kind of like a cautionary tale of success for the industry, because they're performing better than the banks. I would imagine the retail banks, still their percentage is still lower the success rate, they're still leaking a bit more than the prepaid and e-money and fintech industries. So, so that's the top level stat. We asked a couple of industry gurus to comment on these stats, and the comment coming back from Julian at PPS is that quite frankly it's really obviously not onboarding enough customers, losing potential customers in the application flow is a risk, but the much bigger risk, of course, is the impact of onboarding bad customers. And Diane, I know you're a big fan of actually looking at examining at what technologies PIF members and the e-money industry uses as part of onboarding.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So then we examined how long it took companies to perform onboarding. So the question we actually posed here was, how long did it take you to perform KYC when the initial database check fails? And we had a real range of answers. And just on the technicalities of that compliance process, firms can, of course, do customer onboarding just using database checks as a means to verify the identity of the individual. And those database checks are generally performed programmatically in less than a second. And so in that instance, onboarding can proceed very, very quickly. But of course, not all customers, not all end users will pass those database checks. Database checks, the limitations of them are well known in terms of match rates, and in some demographics and geographies, then they don't stand up at all. So firms have to use a lot of other technologies in the process. And this graphic here is one from a previous PIF white paper that looks at the KYC tech that the PIF members do use. So Diane, do you want to dwell on this one for a sec?
Sure, yeah. I mean, I think what's really important to sort of bear in mind is that as the kind of prepaid fintech sector has grown, so has the provision of RegTech, and the range of KYC tools and technologies that PIF members are using is growing all the time, including, for example, the increased use of facial biometrics and digital footprint analysis. And I think one of the reasons we're seeing, much greater adoption of these new and innovative verification tools is that our members are all too often asked to go above and beyond the basic identity checks to counter fraud and risk.
Yeah, so there's a real range of different technologies at play there, which does in part explain sometimes why it takes a little bit longer. And so in terms of taking a little bit longer, here's the results. This is what the survey said. So we see here that a couple of firms got it very, very quick. They've probably got some kind of like a seamless waterfall process from database check to ID document validation that might also include other technologies in a nice little chain. But if we look at the overall picture here, there's really only 3 out of the 14 firms we surveyed that are taking less than 15 minutes. So the majority are actually taking greater than 15 minutes. Some of which actually taking up to or longer than a day. So Emily, as the eMoney program manager legend in the virtual rooms today, what do you make of this?
If I had to wait for a hamburger for 15 to 30 minutes at a fast food restaurant, I wouldn't be a happy customer. So, I think this is very, very interesting, because some of the newer products, the Revoluts, the Currencies of this world, their onboarding process takes 5 minutes. They've really thought about the UX, the UI within the app. It seamlessly drags you along the process, so it doesn't start to draw out for too long. The customer is engaged, and in fact, they request information from you without you really realizing. You see it as a cool feature, like, for example, having to take a selfie or uploading imagery, but actually it's gathering crucial information for the verification process. I think 15 to 30 minutes, and the fact that, there's still a large portion of products that still take 15 to 30 minutes is actually quite scary. We're such an immediate consumer base, particularly in the UK, but I mean, throughout Europe, we expect things immediately. So 15 to 30 minutes just feels still like a very drawn out process. And I think after 5 to 10, if it were me personally, I would probably stop the application process.
Yeah, I think you're right. There's that correlation between the length of time it takes and abandonment. The user will often think, oh, I'll get this done another day, I'll come back, I'll go somewhere different. And I think that this is perhaps in part why we see lower abandonment rates in other industries like online gambling, because there's a much more immediate emotional gratification of getting through the account opening process and getting that bet on. That said, I think the economic driver of getting access to your first financial instrument, whether that be e-money or prepaid or a challenger bank account, that's a pretty powerful driver. But you can't get away from the fact that the longer it is and the worse the onboarding experience, then that kind of like sets the first impression of what the end user makes that company.
Absolutely. And this is the first point that people are going to have with your brand. So why wouldn't you invest in it?
Yeah, I think as part of the research, you spoke to Accomplished Financial in this, didn't you, Emily? And this is what you got back from them.
So yeah, Accomplished Financial are an issuer processor and also handhold a lot of successful program managers. And they were talking from personal experience. The digital onboarding process was a key differentiating factor for their client base, and that they had seen success with some of their clients that had much slicker onboarding processes versus other clients that were struggling to pick up customers.
Yeah, and we also spoke to, as part of the research, we also spoke to Pavle at Panovates, and this is what he came back with. Emily, would you like to share your analysis of this comment as well?
Absolutely. So Panovate, slightly different. They are a program manager. They also do much more of the technology front end side of things. So they're really involved in the UX, the UI piece, the actual design of that customer onboarding process. So for them, they'd noted that for some firms, if it takes a long period of time, customers just are disengaging. But there's also a cost element there. And some of the newer players that are coming to market possibly don't invest in this initial piece of the puzzle for proper, for a decent verification journey. And perhaps that needs to be looked at a bit more.
Okay, great. So let's have a look at the journey then. One of the things we asked our survey respondents is where they saw the highest dropout during customer acquisition. So what this visual isn't saying is that there was 14% dropouts at collection of the initial identity details. It's not saying there was 50% dropout at the ID document phase. What it's saying is that we asked them where they saw the highest dropouts during the acquisition process. And so 50% of the respondents said that the highest dropout stage, the highest dropout pain point for them was during document validation. And then the next highest levels of dropout were fairly equally spread right through the initial identifying the individual, through to collecting proof of address, through to collecting the load, getting the load onto the card. And 7% said that they saw the highest dropout rate when the user was asked to evidence source of funds. So, so Diane, Emily, does this make sense in your eyes in terms of what you know about the industry?
Yeah, I think it does make sense. I mean, the reason for the dropout at that point of ID document, I guess could suggest two things. One, that the process is not as or has friction, or it could be that they simply don't have those documents, and are they in fact bad customers?
I think there's also another layer here, which is laziness. In all honesty, people, if you go through a process and then there's a requirement to go and get documentation, you have to get up, you have to go and find it, you have to work it. And for a lot of people, that's a mental barrier to completing the journey. So they just go, oh, I can't be bothered. I'm in the middle of feeding the kids dinner. I've got to go and do this. I'm on my way out. I thought I could get through this a lot quicker than it's taken me, and now it's taking me even longer, so therefore I'm disengaging. So I think that could also play a part, and we've all experienced when we've gone to get something and have been asked, for example, for our council tax bill. That's not something you have on your person at all times. So it does require effort, and I think that also impacts what people drop off at this stage.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think you've also got to make provision that sometimes people's journey might be broken. The kids might be coming in wailing at them. The dog might be like doing whatever. And I think you have to allow people to stop and start in the process as well. I think that's true for real life, but it's also true for reasons of accessibility as well. For visually impaired users, physically impaired users, you have to actually enable the journey to be stopped and started. And otherwise, I think you will see a bigger dropout. Okay, so next up, we examined right, what is the actual percentage dropout when customers are asked to provide an ID document. So this tallies quite nicely with the overall stats. So we're seeing here that on average 27% are dropping out when they're asked for an ID document. Again, Diane, Emily, what's your diagnosis of these numbers?
I think we're seeing some firms operating a bit of a leaky bucket. Would you agree, Emily?
Yes, and I'm tempted to say that perhaps some of those are older products versus some of the newer guys. I think there's a lot of legacy out there where it's just a piece of the puzzle that people forget to review. And once it's live, it might have been live 3 years, but the process 3 years ago is very different to the process that we see today.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the clients that we start working with, up until they're using a process like HooYu, they're asking a customer to email a document in that goes to a manual team, and they then have like some kind of like SLA of 24 hours, 48 hours to review it and get back to the customer. At that point, the customer's well and truly long gone. That said, we've also encountered a demographic of emoney and fintech that obsess about the customer onboarding experience, and they've got their offices plastered with pieces of paper up on the walls that depict every single permutation of the customer journey and how they can smooth out those pain points. So I think you do get two very, very different kinds of organisation that want to really embrace and geek out about the customer onboarding journey.
I do think the consumer products are probably much more convenient for onboarding than the corporate products. And from my experience, the number of paperwork items and support documentation for corporate products obviously makes that journey more challenging and more friction-full versus some of the consumer-based products. Yeah,
you're exactly right. We did a report with Consult Hyperion a couple of years back looking at business account onboarding, and that's exactly what we find. The stats were much higher for abandonment in terms of business customer onboarding. That said, I think now as you see a lot of the challenger banks announcing their business account offering, you'll see much better journeys, much slicker journeys. I think one of the gold standards there is Tide. They're counting up. They've got great account opening journeys. Okay, right. Let's see what our survey respondents said. So, Diane, would you like to talk through Chris's perspective on the whole issue?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think he hits the nail on the head here. And going back to what I said earlier about a leaky bucket. Losing over, I think it's one and two customers because they probably haven't optimized the capture and validation of ID documents.
Yeah, yeah. It's about bringing the KYC tech hand in hand with a really good good UI layer.
Yeah.
Okay, and we also went to currency for their perspective. Emily, I think you spoke to these folks.
I did indeed, and I think this is a really good example of the newer entrants and the level of focus that they've put on this onboarding journey. So when I was speaking to Currency, they were saying they basically reiterated this journey time and time and time and time again, and took 6 months to go through it to make sure that it was optimized. And even then, they don't believe they're finished with improving the process. They believe it will be an ongoing and regularly revisited part of their overall product spec, which was rather interesting, because again, it's very different from some of the conversations I may have had even 3 years ago.
I think that's accurate. I think everything's got a lot better in terms of the focus on customer onboarding over the last 3 years. It's I think one of the earlier quotes from Accomplish and Financial, they said, look, it's now become a differentiator. Okay, so what about when the customers ask for an address document? What's the dropout rate here? Again, very, very similar, average of 26% compared to 27%. In general, the address document is asked for after the ID document. So I think you're going to see most of the people are going to abandon. They're going to abandon at the first point when they're asked to provide supplemental information. But again, Diane, Emily, what's your take on these numbers?
So I guess it's showing that the majority of firms that we gathered information from are suffering above average dropout levels, with the average being lowered by the performance of some firms who are enjoying less than 5% dropout at this stage of the onboarding process.
Yeah, this graph does get a bit flatter, doesn't it? There's more around the middle than there is at the extremes, compared to the overall picture.
I think we also have to think about the amount of people that now in shared accommodation as well, who may not necessarily, they might be renting, their address details may not be on the utility bills, it might be something that's difficult for them to get hold of. So there is, I think, a certain element of that, but I do agree that this is a much more sort of, as you say, a flatter evaluation.
Yeah, I would like to think that as a society, we're on the march towards a digital identity where we don't have to root around for paper proofs and have to verify their identity once and then reassert their identity using that previously verified identity. And if the relying party wants a bit more certification, a bit more trust, then the user is just asked to incrementally add what they haven't done before when they previously verified their identity. So I think that's where we'll get to at some point. We spoke to Suits.me about their work, and Kim, the CMO there, she was quite keen to talk about how they've been constantly A/B testing different calls to action, different buttons, different colours, and trying to really the amount of information that they're asking for in their account opening process. The buzzword all around there, of course, is CRO, conversion rate optimization, and they're doing a lot of A/B testing in their account opening process. And who was it that spoke to Lerex?
It was me.
Go on then.
So I spoke to Jill Tremblett, who's the head of operations at Lerex Technology. They're a program manager. They've built their own program for their own use, and now they successfully onboard new customers with different customer journeys. But they highlighted that building the slick onboarding process was vital for them. And bearing in mind they've learned from experience that basically minimal amount of dissatisfaction from the customer's perspective, but also making sure they're aware of the documentation that's required to fulfill the process. So basically reiterating lines of communication that you need to be clear with the customer early on. This is what we need from you, and these are the pieces of documentation that you require to successfully and quickly get onboarded.
Yeah, it's all about education, guiding the user through the process.
Exactly, and that was the first time someone had actually mentioned that, being clear about your requirements of documentation early on in the process,
Yeah.
so that they have time to go away and get it. It sounds very simple, but actually quite important.
Yeah, I quite like the adage, of tell them what you're going to tell them, and then tell them what you told them. Just so if you don't think you can over communicate, enough.
Exactly.
Yeah, agree.
Especially if you need several forms. People are going to go, right, well, I've gone and got my passport, that's fine. Oh no, now I need a bill. Where have I left those? So yeah, just being very communicative and very clear on your expectations of what's needed to complete the process.
Yeah. Okay, so and then to finish up with the research, we asked the respondents to say, right, what are you doing over the next 12 months to improve your growth in customer numbers, to improve your customer acquisition? So Diane, do you want to share your interpretation of these stats?
Yeah, I think this is offers some really interesting insight into how firms are planning to improve their customer acquisition levels. We can immediately see that firms are planning to ramp up their social media marketing, and I think that is as a direct result, possibly from the last year. And also looking to improve their SEO and digital presence. So, the days of, advertising on the tube, I think a lot of firms now are thinking that, they need to do as much as they can in the virtual world compared to what they've been doing before. And I think, everybody almost everybody is looking to, streamline, the effectiveness of their current onboarding.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the number here is stark, isn't it? That twice the many people are going to work on streamlining the onboarding process and making it more effective, compared to using something like PPC to throw more traffic into the top of the funnel.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay, so with those stats in mind, now let's turn to program manager legend Emily. And Emily, if you can talk us through the business case for how you might go about this and how you might couch it when you're looking at it as a project.
Absolutely. Okay, so let's be perfectly honest, we're not going to be seeing a lot of traction, as Diane pointed out, on tube or bus advertising in central London anymore. So program managers are going to need to change tactic, and the majority will go online, and the majority will be looking at social media and Google advertising. Now, for those of you that have played with Google Ads, the minimum spend for your first Google ad is typically £60. That's what they suggest in order to see some sort of a return. You can get some decent hit numbers even by spending £30 with Facebook, but you have to be quite clear about the audience that you're targeting. So from my experience, typically I've seen programs, general purpose reloadable programs, start with advertising budgets of £24 per customer for acquisition, all the way up to travel card programs ended up spending in excess of £200 per hit, using Google Ads to attract new cardholders. So that's a lot of money you're going to potentially be spending to acquire a new customer. But what you don't want to happen is to spend that money acquiring them and then have such a poor onboarding process that you're basically wasting and throwing away very good money, which, let's be honest, none of us can afford to lose at the moment.
So we did a little bit of maths, put this table together to look at the amount of money that's wasted from marketing spend with a leaky bucket onboarding process.
Very, very basic maths, but £65,000 quite quickly adds up on even a small program. Now, bearing in mind the average program is between 25,000 to 150,000 cardholders. So 10,000 cardholders isn't a lot to some of the bigger programs in the market. But if you've got 2,600 of that 10,000 unable to complete the onboarding process, and they're genuine customers, and you've spent money on trying to acquire them in the first place, 65,000 is a lot to lose, and they're not going to come back to you.
Yeah, so that's the kind of like what I like to call an overinflated cost of acquisition, because that's not the true cost of acquisition. The true cost of acquisition is the number of customers you got in, take into account the number of customers you lost, and then to look at the potential lost program revenues. I know it's really hard to put a number on how much average revenue per user you can get from a program. So I assumed £40 as a bit of a midpoint, Emily.
I know, and you're right to do that. I mean, it's very difficult to assume because there are so many different variances and so many different ways of pricing, so many different revenue streams. So it is a little bit finger in the air. But I mean, I don't think that anyone in this market can afford to lose one client, one potential card holder, one potential account holder. But losing 20% of them, I don't think any of us are that well healed to say that we can afford to see that happen.
Yeah.
But if we jump, do you want to jump to the next one, Dave, and then we'll show them those numbers?
Yeah, I have jumped to the next one. This is my mistake actually in the slide. It says wasted marketing spend when I should actually say lost program revenue.
Exactly. So yes, this is indicative of the sort of, just to give a sample of the earnings that people can make from these programs. But you've lost them from a marketing budget perspective, but you also lost them from an ongoing revenue perspective. And £40, making £40 off a customer is, as you say, Dave, is conservative. You would want to be making an awful lot more for that customer from habitual spend and other activities such as fees and FX. But if you've lost them, you've lost them, and they're just never going to come back after that. And what I've seen previously is if someone feels that they've had a negative experience, then they're not going to buy from your brand again. So even if you go and you launch a card program, a secondary sub program that's amazing, that customer's going to be not wanting to engage with you again.
Yeah, so it's basically leaving money on the table. So that's the problem. That's the size of the problem. Surprise, surprise. How does HooYu help you fix that problem? So just to give a quick view on what HooYu does to maximise the successful onboarding whilst performing lots of robust KYC. And the answer is very, very simple. There's two sides to the HooYu coin. The first side is lots of clever different KYC technology that's knitted together in a clever waterfall process. So you can use different KYC tools on a risk-based approach based on how much risk you see in each and every particular customer. But the second side of the coin is what UI and UX layer we provide to our clients to help them help their customers, guide their customers through the process. And that's the sort of stuff is, for example, allowing people to start on the desktop at lunchtime and finish on their tablet on the sofa in the evening. It's lots of clever UI to give them dynamic guidance as they're going through the process. It's allowing different variants of that journey to account for different users. It's using reminders to summon them back into the process, and it's using different languages to perhaps communicate with that Polish demographic you're going after as part of an acquisition campaign, to show the onboarding UI in Polish, just to make it a little bit easier for them. So I'd just like to finish up before we go to Q&A with a very quick tour of the process. So let me just flick over to my browser. So now you should see the HooYu process. So this is what we like to call the HooYu landing page. It's where you can explain to your customer why they have to go through the HooYu process and what they have to do. And this is a page that sits inside your website or your app. And then earlier we touched on the importance of explaining to customer what it is they have to do. And so this is what's called the scope of the request. It tells them the kind of things they have to do. This is a very long list of choices for them, but it can be as short or as long as you like, based on how much risk you see in that particular customer. So I'm the user. I'll click Get Started. Bit of a GDPR statement. No need to dwell on that just now. And then the HooYu process starts. So this is what we like to call the Journey Hub. This is, again, where the user is constantly reminded about what it is that they have to do. So I'm going to go through a process very, very quickly. And the first task I have to perform is liveness detection. So I'm now going to use my webcam to start that. But again, supposing I don't have a webcam, instead I could jump off to my mobile device, key in my mobile phone number here, and then I'd start it on my mobile instead. But just for the speed of it, that's now going to start the process, and it could wake up my camera, and I'd go on and go in and do the process that way, or I can go off to my mobile device, or in course I could decide to provide an identity document, and I have a choice of different ID documents to use here. I'm going to use my passport. Back to the guidance, give the user a bit of help about what they have to do and why they have to do it. And again, I can upload it from my mobile device, or I can upload it from my computer. So I could upload it from my computer that way. So there's lots of different ways to go through the process. And it's a very, very quick way to perform identity document validation. I can upload a proof of address. I can upload an attachment. Sometimes, particularly for business account opening, it makes sense to ask the user to give a VAT registration certificate or a certificate of incorporation at the same time. So it's really all around giving that lovely UI and UX layer to your user to help them through the process. Of course, if I spoke earlier about languages, if I was French, I would automatically detect that my device settings were in French, and would serve the HooYu UI in that particular language, or in lots of different other languages as well. So here's Turkish, for example, and so on and so forth. So that's just a very, very quick couple of screens I wanted to show you that really reflects how important it is to give them KYC tools, but the customer onboarding journey behind it as well. So, so now let's go back to the PowerPoint. Okay, and so now we're going to go to some Q&A. If you please throw the questions at us through the GoToWebinar panel, we'll answer your questions in turn. And we've already got a couple during the course of the webinar so far. So let me just read some of those out. Okay, so Chris has asked, are there any particular onboarding lessons to be drawn in respect of SMEs and know your business? So I've got a couple of views on that, but Emily, do you want to have a chat through that one first?
I once worked with a client that was onboarding for SMEs for corporate expense-based products, and I voluntarily went through the process in my own time to check it all worked, signed up, and accidentally discovered that the KYC provider, there was a glitch, and when I flagged it with the clients, they identified lost probably about 1,500 applications. So what I would probably suggest from a corporate perspective is just keep testing the process yourself. Make sure that you have clear insights of all your connection points. Make sure that it's as simple as possible. People are very clear on documentation, time for their process for the application to be processed, because I also see instances where we get high levels of customer services calls, which also cost us money, because people aren't aware that their card or their account may not be for 24 to 48 hours, for example.
Yeah, I think the other important thing when it comes to KYB processes is that because there's generally going to be a higher volume of money going through those instruments, it's a higher risk. And from what I've seen, the KYB process involves a deeper level of verification of the principles behind the business. It tends not to be just database verification, but it tends to be document validation as well. Like I said earlier, if you want an example of a really good KYB, a good customer onboarding process, I would head on over to Counting Up, who are an SME bank, or Tide, perhaps, for example. The other thing about onboarding for KYB is obviously it's not just about the principal applying for the account, but it's also the shareholders and directors, and how can you tie together the KYC processes for those individuals before you approve the KYC file as a whole for that business account opening process. So earlier we had a comment about the disparity in terms of performance of the customer onboarding success rates. We had a comment about the disparity between young and old. I think we did touch on this briefly earlier about the difference between perhaps some of the older firms versus the newer, cooler fintechs. Diane, what's your view on it? And Emily, would you like to chip in on that one as well?
Yeah, I think it's as Emily said earlier. I think we have providers who have been around for many years, and as you say, there is now new breed of fintechs, and all of the providers are inherently agile. But I think we are seeing quite a stark difference between some of the more established players and the newer players implementing some of the more recent reg tech innovations.
And I think it varies on products too. For customer initiatives where you've got maybe government disbursement, some of the onboarding processes for them are painful, for want of a better phrase, and it's purely because it's a solution to a problem that the local council, the government has to have in place, and therefore the customer onboarding process isn't really thought about, and they don't really care because they feel that those people signing up have a need and will just have to cobble through. But I do think that as we look at more challenges, more people have variety when it comes to payment providers, which is wonderful. There will be a lot more scrutiny on that onboarding process and how it impacts customers.
Okay, cool. Thanks for that, guys. So we've got a question from Aidan. Do you have any age demographic stats in terms of which age groups bail out first? So that's a really good question.
Very good question.
Yeah, we didn't have that as part of the survey. But I can go off and get some insight into those stats across the HooYu client base. The initial temptation is to say that it's the older people first who are less comfortable about this sort of process. But we have had an
I would argue with you on that, David.
Yeah.
Because older people,
I would say actually.
Older client bases are much more traditionally used to providing paperwork, but they also equally want to deal with people face to face. So they might get frustrated with the technology, but I think when it comes to actually providing the relevant documentation, that wouldn't be out of their comfort zone. I would argue that maybe the slightly younger generation, the millennials of this world, may struggle to access some of the documentation, like, for example, utility bill with address on it, because they live in a house share, it's all rented. And equally, they might just think, well, this is a faff. Surely this can be a lot more digitally enhanced as opposed to manual intervention.
Yeah, I think you're right. I was about to say that.
And I think also.
Sorry, go on, Dan. After you.
I was going to say, I think, when you think about millennials, it is all about instant gratification. As compared to perhaps older demographic where, that they probably have a little bit more patience, perhaps than younger people.
Yeah, sure. I was going to say that I think the record for the oldest person going through HooYu is an 89-year-old. So I was also going to say I think there's a strong set of evidence to say that look, it's not necessarily just the older people that bail first. It'd be interesting to get into those stats on another webinar at a later date. We should get a bit more granular about that. Okay, cool. So we're coming towards the top of the hour now. Let's start to wrap up. So in terms of closing comments, Emily and Diane, I'll give the floor to you.
Well, I think what we learned from this study, and one of the most important takeaways for me with regards to this study, was actually how divided the industry is, as we've identified older products versus younger products. But I also felt very, very encouraged off the back of this by the amount of dedication and financial backing that a lot of the fintechs, the newer guys, are actually putting into play for their products, and the amount of time they're taking to think this through. If you now go online and you can look on this on YouTube, Revolut have videoed their onboarding process. It's up there as an information video, if you will. And I think we'll see a lot more companies doing that. I think in a way it positions their companies as being best in class, but also it's a really good tool to show people what they're going to have to do in order to become a Revolut customer. And I can see us being a bit more savvy with how we engage with people moving forward. So that's one of the key things that I'm going to be taking away from this study.
Yeah, no, I agree with everything Emily has said there. And I think going back to one of the quotes that we had, I think it was from Accomplish, which really, for me sums up the opportunity really well. We have the tools, we have the technology, they're innovating all the time, and as I mentioned just now, fintechs are inherently agile and can move at pace. So there's a really huge opportunity to use these tools and see regulation as actually an innovation enabler, and also as a means to happy customers.
Yeah, my conclusion is that having done this research with you guys and presented today, my reflection is actually how far the financial services industry has come, not just prepaid and fintech, but how far they've come from moving beyond database checks to have seamless processes, to have plan B up their sleeve when somebody can't be verified straight away, and how obsessive a lot of companies now are about the customer onboarding journey. So I think that overall, the financial services industry should kind of like pat themselves on the back. But that said, still a leaky bucket, still a lot of work to do. Okay, cool. All right. So on that note, it's now 5 minutes to 4. Time for us to go back to our desks and our reports and emails. Stay safe, everybody. Thanks very much for joining us today, and we'll be sending out a recording of this so you can recap on it whenever you need. Thank you. Bye for now.
Thank you.
Thank you.